So this is tantamount to a structural deficit. We're spending more than we're bringing in. And our revenue, if you will, is about enrollment. And if our enrollment goes down and we don't have supplemental funds to make up that net loss, we have a deficit.
Well, that's Seattle Public Schools Superintendent Dr. Brent Jones speaking to me on Seattle Channel almost exactly a year ago, talking about a difficult budget picture that hasn't changed all that much in the past 12 months, and depending on who you talk to, may be getting worse. And speaking of Dr. Jones, the school district is looking for his replacement right now, what would be the fourth leader of Seattle Public Schools in roughly the past decade. Who's up for that job? And how are Seattle's education challenges tied to pressures from the state and federal level? And that's even before we start talking about early learning and preschool. We are taking a close look at the world of education this week on a very special Patrons First podcast here, a Patrons First episode of Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I am a host on Seattle Channel, and joining me, a very special guest. Great to have him back on the program here. I am with former Seattle School Board Director Stephan Blanford, and also the Executive Director of Children's Alliance, a statewide child advocacy organization. He's also about to start a new chapter in his life. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But Stephan, welcome back to the podcast.
Always good to be with you, Brian.
Love it, love it, love it. Thank you, Stephan. Thanks for doing this. Thanks to everybody listening out there. And a big thanks to the patrons of the show. This program's all about you. You get access to this podcast before anybody else. So if you would like to support the show, much appreciated. You get access to this Patrons First content and so much more with a pledge of $5 or more per month. You can even get your own Seattle News, Views, and Brews decal. How about that? Love to have you. Plus, you can find this podcast on Converge Media. The video version is on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, time to get rolling. Time for Right Here, Right Now. Stephan, I know it's been a few years since you served on the school board, but I know you've also been keeping close tabs on what's been happening here. I mentioned this structural budget problem explained to me by Dr. Jones. He, of course, is having some health issues, has had to step down from his job, hoping he recovers soon. But when it comes to these budget problems, Seattle's not alone. School districts across the state are wrestling with this. Can you give us this big picture understanding of why Seattle Public Schools appears to be in this continual budget deficit?
Yeah, it's a challenge. And like you said, all school districts are grappling with it. We underfund education. The Supreme Court of the state of Washington said in the McCleary decision that we have grossly underfunded education. And because it's the primary or paramount duty of state government to adequately fund education, we've struggled with that for years and continue to do so. Ultimately, it's a lack of tax revenue that is driving this. I think even more, there's just a lack of political will to grapple with these issues and make sure both that wealthy districts like Seattle can adequately fund their students and low wealth districts, which there are many across the state, can adequately support their students as well.
Yeah, and enrollment is a piece of this too. I know it's a little convoluted in terms of how a student in a chair equals dollars at the school, but that's been in decline for Seattle Public Schools over the past few years. A bit of a turn over this past year. There are 14 more students, I'm happy to report, this year as compared to last, but certainly not big growth, and we're under 50,000. And I know it is well above that when you were a director. Can you talk about that enrollment issue? Because I think that's a big one here too.
Yeah, obviously, the district gets more money based on the number of students that it enrolls, and I think they still go with the October 1 or October 3 enrollment date. So based on the number of students that are in school on that day, that's how much your district will get in funding. And since the pandemic, those numbers have been dropping. They were dropping even before. There was a time when Seattle Public Schools had over 100,000 students. And so to be at less than 50,000 and still have roughly the same number of buildings, maybe even more teachers than they did, you can put those two things together and realize that there's not enough money to spread around.
Yeah, and you're going down a path I definitely wanted to go down here because it has been such an interesting 2 steps forward, 2 steps back move over this past year. This plan to close and consolidate schools as a way to save some money. It was presented in late 2023, but after some not unexpected outcry from families, the plan ended up getting shelved last November, though the district says it's not completely off the table. So I just look at this, Stephan, this rollout and the rollback of this plan. not a good moment for Seattle Public Schools. Even the school board itself has admitted it's caused some serious damage to public trust. Do you see this issue of closing and consolidating schools coming back?
Yeah, I do see it coming back. Maybe many of your listeners won't like this, but
Mm,
have for a long time believed that we need to consolidate some of the schools and close some of the schools.
mm,
When I was on the board from 2013 through 2017, we would meet with other school board directors around the country, and we would get a packet of information ahead of time that shared the size of the budget, the number of students enrolled, and the number of schools. And Seattle Public Schools was always a huge outlier. We would have 100 schools. Most school districts that had the same number of students would have 2/3 the number of schools that we have. We, have had this long tradition of small schools in neighborhoods that serve the community. And that's a nice thing to have when you have the revenue. But
yeah.
when you don't have the revenue, then it really has some pretty serious impacts.
Yeah, the interesting part about it was, for me, it was a situation where even if there were some closures to these schools, I don't think that would be a full answer, I guess, to the budget issues.
Yeah, there's a structural deficit that is difficult to resolve. And in my work currently, I talk to legislators all the time.
Yeah.
And many of them say, until you deal with the structural issues in Seattle, there's no chance that we're going to continue to support the district going forward. So
Wow.
there are a lot of challenges and a lot of difficult decisions
For sure.
to be made.
Yeah, for sure. And whatever happens with school closures and these other issues, it'll be the job of a new set of leaders for Seattle Public Schools, because SPS looking for a new superintendent, Dr. Jones stepping down, and 4 of the 7 school board positions up for election this fall. I wanted to ask that broad question of what kind of leadership does Seattle Public Schools need right now? What do you think?
I've always believed that we need strong governance leadership, people who understand policy, are willing to make difficult decisions, absolutely listen to the community in making those decisions, but are not listening to just the loudest voices, which it's very seductive when you become a school board director to draw your attention to those who are yelling the loudest. And many of those are folks who want to preserve the status quo. We can't continue with the status quo. It just won't work. And so being able to make those difficult decisions, I'm a strong believer in equity. So somehow making decisions that don't put more burden on those who are already, on kids and families that are already struggling.
Yeah.
I think you have called out a pretty significant challenge with 4 new or potentially 4 new school board directors coming on. It takes a while for you to understand what it means to be a school board director and how to make those difficult decisions.
And I did want to take a closer look at the students and families of Seattle Public Schools, because we've seen a few other issues crop up in the past couple months here. One is around choosing to go to a school other than the one assigned by the district. About 10% of Seattle students apply to do that. The research shows about half of the students out there get their pick, which leaves hundreds who don't. And oftentimes they'll leave the district at that point. I know this is a very touchy issue with enrollment not in a healthy place, but as I understand this, Stephan, the district is trying to balance choice. Families want to have that choice versus the stability of enrollment in neighborhood schools. Does this system need an overhaul? It just seems like this is a very difficult thing to maintain.
Well, families being able to choose the school that they want to go to is a very rich tradition in Seattle and in many parts of the country. And lots of parts of the country, it does not exist. You go to the school that your district assigns, and
that's what you get. Yeah, right.
Right. That's what you get. So it's a bit of a challenge to be able to accommodate the needs of those who would potentially leave the district if they don't get what they want, which will exacerbate the revenue problem that we already have, but also try to drive efficiencies, like families driving across town in order to get the preferred school or expecting transportation to get to those schools. That's difficult. And that draws revenue away from the classroom, which is where you want the majority of your revenue going.
Yeah, definitely an equity conversation there that I know is going to continue for Seattle Public Schools. But I did want to touch on one more big hot button issue, and that would be public safety, because Seattle Public Schools is opening up the conversation again to have police officers on campus after banning them in 2020. Definitely a big issue here. A number of students and advocates were actually at a school board meeting just a few weeks ago protesting this idea. They'd rather have counselors, not cops, is one of the taglines you'll hear. Then you have a number of others pressing for change after the shooting death of Amar Murphy Payne in the parking lot of Garfield High School just last year. Stephan, help me out with this. Your thoughts about bringing armed police officers back to Seattle high schools?
Yeah, it's a tough one, and it's one of the issues that makes me glad I'm not a school board director
It's a lot
anymore.
right now, yeah.
Because the research would show, and I should back up and say, I was in the audience after the shooting happened at Garfield a few days later because I live in that community. I was there and I saw the heartbreak that families felt, the lack of safety that they feel. But we continue to go on this pendulum swing where it's no security measures at all or maximum security measures. And I think we need to try to find some balance there that recognizes that schools they should be places of safety. When you send your kid to school, you should have absolute assurance that that kid's going to come home at the end of the day. But they exist in communities where there are lots of guns and lots of potential for harm to happen. So striking a balance between those two is something that we need strong leadership in order to accomplish.
Yeah, Seattle's new police chief, Sean Barnes, has opened up the idea and is supportive of it, but maybe it's a softer approach, not a full uniformed officer or something along those lines. I think I hear what you're saying, and I definitely hear that some of the different people talking here, Seattle Public Schools and Seattle Police, do want to try to find that middle ground because you're right, this has just seemed so polarized over the last couple of years. All right, well, coming up, taking a look at education and early learning at the state level, a lot to talk about here. Where is our legislature making investments? And why is Washington falling in the rankings when it comes to overall well-being of our children? Some details next on Now Hear This. As we have talked about on this podcast, the state legislature this session wrestled with a $14 billion deficit projected over the next 4 years. And while initially state Democrats who control the House and Senate were pushing for a new wealth tax to solve that problem, Governor Ferguson pushed back on that idea. And the legislature settled on a plan that brings in about $4 billion in new and higher taxes next year with an assortment of cuts as well. Education was a major part of the budget picture, as explained by Senate Majority Leader Jamie Peterson of the 43rd District in Seattle after the session.
We gained agreement between the two chambers and really with unanimous votes in both the House and the Senate on additional funding for special education, broad bipartisan agreement on the need for the $1.4 billion of additional money that will be flowing to our school districts across the state. And I think that that's something that we can feel really proud of.
Stephan, I know there are some tough parts to this budget that we're going to talk about in a minute, but those investments in special education and operating costs, it sounds like a positive to me. How do you look at what the legislature did this past session here?
If anyone's paying attention to district finances and district operations, you know that special education has been neglected. There are federal and state laws that mandate that it's adequately funded. And so I was pleased to see that those investments have been made. I struggle a little bit with the overall picture and some of the moves that the governor made. Our advocacy organization is a strong believer that we should tax the wealthy in order to shore up some of these deficits. And the voters in the capital gains tax that was on the ballot in 2024, overwhelmingly 64% supported increased taxes on wealthy people in order to shore that up. I'm not quite sure what the governor's thinking was or who was talking to him, but we are still grappling with a huge deficit. And that means that a lot of kids are not going to get what they need in order to be successful.
Yeah, a regressive tax system, too, in our state, one of the most regressive in the country, certainly doesn't help either when it comes to that.
In 49 out of 50.
Yeah, that's I know. We're not number 50 anymore, but it's not a good record to have. In looking at that, I thought I heard the governor say out of it, he wouldn't necessarily be against a wealth tax, but using the wealth tax, a newer tax, to try to answer the whole budget problem didn't seem like a good idea to him. So I feel like there might still be some room on the table for this to move maybe next year. Did you get a feel for that in talking to legislators about this?
He shot down the proposal at such an early point that I wonder. There were lobbyists that we were talking to who were saying he's not going to put any political skin in the game, but if you advocacy groups are able to push on this, he wouldn't be opposed. And so we were strategizing that way, and then very quickly discovered, no, he's pretty strongly opposed to any kind of progressive revenue. And so we were super disappointed because the regressivity of the taxing structure and the budget means that low income people are going to pay a disproportionate percentage of their income in order to support these critical programs. And that's politically, it's not good. And economically, over time, it is really bad for the state.
And can we go back to some of these equity concerns you brought up earlier in terms of the McCleary decision of 2012 by the state Supreme Court? I'm asking because there was a House bill that went through, 2049. I need to do some more research on this, but my initial take on it was it allows districts to use local levies to help pay as much as $500 per student. And it looks like that's basic education. And I really thought the state was trying to stay away from that based on the McCleary decision of more than a decade ago. Do you know what's going on here?
Yeah, you've got that right. So in our state, we have an equalization formula. What it does is it ensures that low property districts, and there are many in the state,
they don't have as much property tax coming their way. Yeah.
They don't have as much revenue because property tax is what funds education. So we create this equalization formula to make sure that the wealthy districts, the Mercer Islands and Issaquahs and Seattles, don't have so much more wealth that their kids automatically do better than, say, a low-income district. The bill that you're talking about starts to mess with that, starts to move away from equalization and move towards wealthy property tax districts being able to fund their programs. And it's unfortunate. Those of us who fight really hard to think about the entire state know that that's bad. If you are a parent in Mercer Island or Issaquah or Seattle, you like the fact that you can tax yourselves a little bit more to ensure that your kids get what they need.
Looking at how Seattle has funded school levies over the past several years. I mean, they always pass here, but in some of those smaller districts around the state, they don't. I mean, those are people who are in different financial situations there, right?
And you don't have to go very far outside of Seattle to start seeing districts where they don't pass their levies. And you see buildings that are falling down, kids that are getting substandard education. And for those of us that think about the entire state and care about not just what goes on in our local area, but what goes on in parts of the state where there's not enough income to be able to support schools, that's bad. It's bad for our society as a whole.
I wanted to move on to some early learning issues with you, if I could. And could you remind people, please, Stephan, what Children's Alliance is and what it's all about? I know there's a lot of focus on this early learning piece.
Yeah, we are a 42-year-old statewide advocacy organization. So we try to get laws passed that benefit kids, all 1.7 million children in the state, with a particular focus on those that are furthest behind because of poverty or racism. So that means that we think about all 1.7 million children in the state, and a particular focus of ours is early learning, recognizing that those that are furthest behind, if you don't invest in early learning, high quality early learning for them, then they will stay behind. It's almost guaranteed that they won't do well in K-12 and later on in life. And so it's a critical element of our legislative strategy.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about what happened here because I saw that ECAP, this is the Early Childhood Education and Assistance Program in our state, it was supposed to be expanded this year. That expansion was delayed. Can you talk to me about some of the wins and losses, I guess, you were dealing with this session? That ECAP one felt like a really, really big deal.
Yeah, and we fought really hard to get the expansion of ECAP because it is a highly researched and effective program that gets kids ready for kindergarten, and they do well coming out of kindergarten into first, second, third grade. And so it's a good investment to make that has long-term benefits.
And these are for lower income families and so forth?
Yes.
Can you help break that down? Okay.
Yeah, primarily for low income families. And so the expansion of it was suspended. So there would not be more kids that have access to that program going forward. Early ECAP, which is kids who are very, very young. So ECAP is usually 3, 4, 5-year-olds. Early ECAP is 2-year-olds.
Okay.
And that program just goes away.
Wow.
And so it has a huge impact on low income people who are trying to find a place to put their kids so that they can go to work. And it has a disproportionate impact on women who their numbers have increased in the workplace. There are more women that are participating in the workplace because of programs like this. So when they go away, you will see a disproportionate number of women that have to go back into the home to take care of their children, bringing down the family wages and having even more of a negative impact.
Yeah, and I saw this headline on the Children's Alliance website that actually posted a few days before we recorded this podcast. Research from the Casey Foundation that shows our state has fallen in overall child well-being, now 16th in the country. And it's touching on all these issues you're talking about here. We're talking about education. We're talking about places you're able to get childcare. We're talking about economic well-being, which is definitely tied to that childcare piece, health as well here. What do those numbers say to you when we talk about our state falling in the rankings when it comes to overall child well-being?
I heard someone say recently, and it totally resonated with me. We are a progressive state. As part of my work, I travel to other states and get a chance to hear how they're doing. We're a progressive state, but our tax structure is not progressive. It is very regressive. And the result of that is we invest in programs, but then we're not able to support them. The kids that are starting to make positive progress, then they drop off and really suffer as a result. We need structures that actually allow those investments to take root, to be sustained long enough for them to bear the kind of fruit that we as taxpayers expect. I think you're asking a really good question as to why that's not happening.
It's a big state issue. There was one, I guess you could call it a smaller issue, but there are no small issues in education, as you know. The Children's Alliance was working with Attorney General Nick Brown this year on a measure to improve online safety for kids. Bipartisan support in the Senate didn't make it through the House. What was going on with this? What's this all about? Is this something the Alliance might bring back to the legislature in the future?
We will definitely bring it back. We are one of the few states that does not have any kind of legislation to prevent kids from being targeted by social media companies. And I'll use a personal example. My kid, during the pandemic, I would occasionally go into her room to kind of check on her and discover that she's getting notifications all night long. And frequently will wake up and start to respond to them. And during the school day, getting those same types of notifications. And the connection between that and suicide rates, anxiety and depression, there is a connection between those two things. And so a large coalition of people in Washington state have started to recognize that that's the case and started to propose legislation. Children's Alliance helped to write the bill along with the Attorney General's office. And as you mentioned, we passed the Senate and we're in the House. We were one vote away. The chair of the committee that we were in, because she's running for election very soon, and she represents a district where the social media companies are based,
Okay.
stood up against us. It was a terrible example of democracy unfettered. And whereas I won't say her name, you don't have to look very far to find out who she is. And I hope there's some measure of accountability for taking those actions that are anti-child.
We will see what happens next session with that, because I know for sure Children's Alliance is going to be bringing that back. All right, well, coming up next, we've looked at the local issues, the state issues, and we better try to tackle what's happening at the national level, too, because it's affecting all these other parts of our education system as well. We'll do our best to break it down on what's next. Stephan, it's difficult to tell what's coming next from Washington, D.C. at this time in our history, but one common trend we have seen under the Trump administration is this idea of dismantling federal agencies. Department of Education, let's get rid of it. Head Start, have the states take care of that. Medicaid, the list really goes on here. What are the main concerns that you have right now about the actions of the federal government and how that's affecting and will affect education and early learning?
Well, Nick Brown spoke at our fundraising event last week.
Right.
And the thing that he said that stuck with me more than anything else, and I'm just going to say it because I think it's real. He said that all the lawyers that he has in the Attorney General's office are working tirelessly and have filed,
21 lawsuits. Yeah, right.
21 lawsuits against the federal government. And he said, we are trying to protect the American people from the American president. And when he said it, it just kind of caught in my mind. And it was very succinct, but everything that we have seen since the middle of January proves that that is true. Whether you're looking at the elimination, what we were calling a pause on Head Start that came out of the blue and immediately had a detrimental impact on children and families and providers all over the state. There were those that were saying, oh, we didn't really mean it. But, if you look at Project 25, it was very clear that Head Start was targeted. And that is a program that has, over the years, since the 60s, propelled millions of children into the middle class.
Yeah, this
and
is early
it's personal
childhood
to
work
me.
too. Yeah, uh-huh.
It's personal to me. My kid was a Head Start kid, right? And I'm very proud of the fact that she just graduated from an elite Eastern university last month. And I know that Head Start was a huge part of the reason that she did that. And I know not only for my kid, but for kids all over the state and all over the country, programs like that make a huge difference. And so Nick Brown, Attorney General Nick Brown, was not wrong in making that statement.
What are your concerns, I guess, going into the future here? I don't know exactly what it means when you say dismantle the Department of Education. I don't know exactly what it means when you see some of these different programs surrounding equity, recognizing people who are transgender in our schools, et cetera, really getting targeted in our state as well. Maybe some concerns along those lines, Stephan?
Yeah, school districts, I think the number is like 10% of K through 12 funding comes from the feds.
Yeah.
And those are programs that are taking students who are furthest away from educational justice and giving them a shot. And so the result of that over time will be the stratification of educational outcomes, where you can predict based on race, based on zip code, socioeconomic status. You can predict who's going to be successful and who's not going to be successful. Something that we've fought against since at least the 50s and the 60s with the Brown versus Board of Education decision. We're going right back towards all of that. And people need to be aware and recognize it may not affect you directly, but it will affect you. There is no doubt about it.
So much to think about there, and we've got a lot more to talk about on that issue, I know, over the years as a country here for certain. But Stephan, I did need to wrap up with you. I wanted to make sure I passed along to people you're stepping down as executive director of Children's Alliance after being on the job for 5 years. Why is that? What is next for you?
I'm going to take a nice long break because having taken this job, months after the pandemic started and working really hard to get some big wins for kids over these last 5 years, I'm ready to take a little bit of a break, but I'll always be involved in kids' issues and trying to work on race and social justice issues.
Is there another spot you're hoping to land in terms of this work, or can you tell us anything about that? What's next for you?
Yeah, I'm going to stay in the state. Lots of people have asked me if I'm heading to greener pastures, and Washington State is a place that I love. Seattle's a place that I love. So I have not decided yet. It's nice to have options. It's kind of the first time in my life I've had a few options. And so going to work with my family and take a little bit of rest and then figure out what's next.
Well, I can't wait to hear what it'll be. Stephan Blanford, former Seattle School Board Director and soon-to-be former Executive Director of the Children's Alliance, thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. We've been a good partnership over the years, and I
sure think so, Stephan.
All the work you've done to elevate these types of issues. So thank you, Brian.
I appreciate you saying that. Thanks a lot, Stephan. And thanks to everybody who's listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Thanks again to patrons who support the show. This special Patrons First podcast is for you. If you'd like to be a patron, please consider a pledge of $5 a month or more on Patreon and support the show. You can hear this podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Thanks for watching on Converge Media, too. See you next time. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2025.